you. Good morning, or is it a good morning? How did everyone find the party last night? Good? It kind of explains the low turnout this morning. It's actually, there's two worst sessions actually to present at TechEd. It's the morning after the Tech Fest, this one, or the last session on the last day. Unfortunately, I've had the displeasure of actually having to present at both of those sessions, and you've fortunately got my session today. However, how many people here have tried to get the Xboxes at the stand at 1:30 by wearing those blue T-shirts? Anybody here tried to get them? Okay, a few people have. I've actually got the last 5 T-shirts, okay, that are available. So the idea here is that you have to basically decipher the code on here, which is actually pretty simple if you think about what it could potentially be. Be at the stand at 1:30. Basically, you do a heads and tails, and basically you got the opportunity to win an Xbox. And I believe they're giving away 3 of them today. Okay, but I've got the last 5 T-shirts, and I will be asking a few questions throughout the presentation. So you need to pay attention. If you answer the question, you can get one of the last 5, which are going. Apparently meant to be, people are quite keen to get them. Anyway, my name's Wayne Newington. I'm a principal consultant working in Microsoft Consulting Services. I've been with Microsoft coming up for about 10 years now. I've been playing around with SharePoint for a while, going right back to the Toho days, which was SharePoint 2001. Also played around with Encompass Resolution, which was a content management server before we acquired the company as well. But what I'm going to talk about today is how to play nicely in the Sandbox. Now, this is a little bit of a strange title. So if you don't know much about SharePoint, what sandboxes are actually sandbox solutions. So what I'm going to do and cover and go through today is give an overview about what exactly are these sandbox solutions. Okay, what are they, what can you actually do on them, and why should you actually use them? The other thing we're then going to talk about is how you can actually manage these sandbox solutions. So I'm essentially going to switch over and put my IT Pro hat on, okay, and show you what you can actually do to manage these sandbox solutions to make sure that they're actually doing what you expect them to do and that the developers are still not doing evil stuff. What we're then going to do is look at this other thing about how can you actually validate sandbox solutions. So this is an idea where you can actually put some type of validation in place to make sure that any customization or sandbox solution that's been uploaded into your environment is actually going to do what you say it's going to do and actually obeys that some type of criteria that you've put in place. Then we're going to look at how can we actually get out of this sandbox. I mean, we're in a little playpen here. We can play around and do stuff in there. But there may be situations where we need to actually get out of there and touch something out such as a secure resource or a secure source out there. So I'm going to give you some opportunities or discussions around how you can actually potentially do that. So if we kind of take a little bit back to why do we actually have sandbox solutions, we kind of look at what we had to do in SharePoint 3, which was that we had the developers, they'd go away, build their custom code, design, build, test it, make all these nice little changes, and then they'd say, right, I want to get this into our SharePoint farm. So what they'd then do is go, here my IT Pro, can you please install this customization of the farm? So they bundle this up, give them the WSP, which is hopefully what you're using, give them to the administrator, and they're going to go, what the hell is this? I guess I have to trust the developer that they're actually doing good stuff. They'd then install it into the farm, possibly play around with some of the code access security settings in there, to try and lock down what they could actually do on that. And then the site collection owner could actually go out and actually use those customizations and actually implement that functionality in there. Now, the issue with that is a couple of things. Basically, the biggest issue there, or the biggest destabilization that you actually have in SharePoint is actually custom code. Okay? So you put stuff in, developers do bad things. And I can say that because I'm a developer as well. I've written some bad code, I know it. Okay? And I've actually brought down the SharePoint farm as well by putting in some bad stuff. So it's a little bit, what can we actually do around this? We've got this customization that we want to put the functionality in, but it can potentially destabilize the farm, bring it down, okay, and cause a lot of issues there. So what we've decided to do, or what we do in SharePoint 2.10, is we've kind of switched a couple of things around. We still have the developers doing design, build and test and do their customizations, etc. But now what they do is that they now hand it over to the site collection owner, not to the IT Pro. So the advantage about this is that the site collection owner can now put this up and load this up into this new thing called a solution gallery that they've got sitting there. So they can then implement and actually get them on those customizations and functionality and use them. And then the IT Pro, the administrator, can now actually look and administer and make sure that those customizations are actually doing what they're meant to be doing, and they're not going to actually destabilize the farm and bring it down. So how does this kind of look? So what we've is the Sandbox. Okay? So what this basically means is that we are completely constrained for our customizations to this Sandbox, which is essentially the site collection that we are actually in. So what this means is that if I do my customizations and write my code, I can basically write my code and do anything from the SP site level down, okay, drive down, SP web, SP list, list item, etc., and work within that. So long as as long as I don't go outside of those particular bounds. So what this means is I can work within here, but I can't access things like what's on the file system. I can't access any web services that are out there. I can't access any, go out and do an ADO.NET connection to another database connection if I wanted to. Or I can't actually access out anything else, such as another site collection. Okay, so this is our bounds and constraints that we've actually got in there. Now, the other thing that we can't do in there is that we can't actually have any visual web parts. Okay? Can anybody answer the question as to why we can't do visual web parts? That's right, it writes it to the files directory, okay, because it actually puts it out into the layout. Have you got a t-shirt? You have now. Okay. Now it puts it into the layouts directory. Okay. Now the reason it puts it into the layouts directory is that with your user code, okay, or the user controls, you can actually do some code behind in that. Now the issue there is that if you've got your code actually inline in your code, which is how you usually do your user controls, they can't actually be put into the content DB. Okay, so in theory, what you could still potentially do is still have a visual web part, but you can actually map it to another library within your list, sorry, a list within your site collection, so long as you don't do any code behind in there. Okay, which kind of defeats the purpose of doing a visual web part in the first place. The other thing you can't do is that you can't actually have any connected web parts as well. So that's the ability to have one web part and connect through to another web part. Okay. Now I don't understand why that's not the case or why you can't do that. I haven't driven into that. But you can't do connected web parts, unfortunately. So that's our constraints and what we can actually do in there. So what actually happens is we get our web parts, or whatever, as an example. We've got our WSP. What we then do is that we upload that into our solution gallery. That then puts it into the web part gallery, and that makes it available. And then at any particular time, our administrators can come along and decide to actually use or actually implement or put that web part on our particular page. Now what happens here is that when it goes to execute that bit of code, it actually goes looking for it first on the file system. If it can't find it on the file system, what it then goes, that must be a Sandbox solution. So what it then does is it reaches into the content DB, pulls that out of the content DB, and temporarily puts it onto the file system, into the site GUID, name of the DLL, onto there. Now the reason we have to do that is that you can only actually run DLLs that are actually on the file system. So it's a temporary location that we actually put in there. What then happens is that the code executes and gets pushed into the Sandbox code service and then renders back out onto the page, and you can actually do that stuff that you're doing there. So what I'll do now is I'll give you the mandatory Hello World web part, okay, and just or Sandbox solution to show you how that actually works. Okay, so I'm just going to sit down, so you just have to trust that I'm here. So what I'm going to do is just do the usual thing, file new project. Okay, go into a SharePoint solution, and I'm just going to do an empty SharePoint project. Now this is just the way I prefer to do things, just to get things going. I'm just going to call this TechEd demo. Okay, and create that empty one. Now the first thing it's going to do is actually prompt me in here to say whether or not I want to do it as a Sandbox solution, okay, or if I want to do it as a full trust solution. Okay. So this is basically what we're trying to do here is get into the recommended guideline now of actually doing Sandbox solutions if you actually can. Okay. So we're trying to push you down this route already. So what I'm going to do, just for the demo's sakes, is deploy this as a farm solution. Now to show you what basically the trick is here, what you can actually do in here. If I click on finish, this is actually going to go out and build my, get my project in place. Now the only thing that's actually different that's sitting in here is this fact that it's put this as a Sandbox solution in here. Now this is basically an attribute of the project that I've got sitting in here. So if I've made the mistake of actually creating this as a full trust, or if I've got a sandbox and I want to flick between them, all I need to do is actually change that attribute. The other thing that it actually does in here too is that if I look at the assembly information in here, particularly down the bottom in here, I haven't got a partial trusted caller. So if I flick this over to be a sandbox solution, it basically does a number of things. The first one is, I want to change that to true. That should actually do it. And then you note that behind the scenes, we've actually got that coming in here, and we've now got this allow partially trusted caller actually happening to our assembly. So this is actually quite a key point. So you can actually take any bit of code that you've got and actually turn it into, it can actually run into the Sandbox solution framework, so long as you add this assembly attribute on there to say allow partially trusted callers. VS.NET 2010 tends to hide this from you, but you do need to be wary about this if you go to do other things such as breaking out of the Sandbox solution. Sorry, it's breaking out of the Sandbox. So I've got that. What I'm going to do now is simply just going to add in a web part. Go new item. Just go for a web part, and I'll go TechEd. Oops, got caps lock on, that's not very good. Hello world, if I can spell. Okay, that comes in, and I'm just going to go this got controls.add new literal control. Okay, so nothing very big deal or flash about that, okay? Oops. What have I done? New, can't spell new. Okay, so that's not a big deal, okay? It's just a very simple web part that we've got in there. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm just simply going to build this. Now within VS.NET I can actually deploy this directly out and put this straight into the solution gallery, okay? But I'm not going to do that. Actually, before I go to do that, I'm going to do another bit of a recommended guideline that we've been advocating, is that under our feature here, I'm actually going to set this and make sure that this is actually scoped to a site collection, MySP site. Give it my TechEd demo feature. Give it a nice name, hello world. Okay, now the other thing that I recommend that you do is that we've got this version number down in here. Now, although it doesn't actually default to anything, the default when it goes into the content or into the configuration database or the content DB is that it's actually going to go in as version 1.0.0.0. What I recommend that you do is actually explicitly always state this, because the idea being here is that this allows us to do an actual upgrade of our solution if we need to in the future, or of our feature, using the feature upgrade framework that we've got. Okay, so just do it as an explicit. The other thing that I should do, just to keep this nice and tidy, is, well, what I would like to do is actually rename my feature so I actually know what it is, SP site, and say it's TechEd. So that's all good. So straight build. Okay, that's okay. Now I can package it out. Now, although I can deploy it straightforward, I don't want to do that. I want to show you what would actually happen from an end user's perspective. So if I go into my solution gallery, how I get there, if I go into my site actions, site settings, I've got this new gallery in here called solutions. And this is where I can upload my Sandbox solutions into, which is very straightforward and easy to do. Simply go upload, browse, go back up, TechEd demo. Okay, and I'm just going to grab the WSP in here. Okay, so this is basically uploaded it up into my solution gallery that I've got sitting there. What I can simply do now is just do a straight activate on that, okay, and that's going to activate the solution. Now, one thing to be wary about when it comes to Sandbox solutions, okay, if you've got any features that are scoped at the site level, at the SP site level, they're going to be automatically activated for you. Okay, it's the default setting that's in there. So if I now go into my site action site settings, go into my site collection features, I should see down the bottom in here, my TechEd demo feature, and you note that it's already been activated automatically for me. Okay? If it was a SP web scope feature, I need to activate that manually. So what this means is that I've now got that nice little web part sitting in there. I can now add that onto my page. Go insert, web part, okay, custom, TechEd hello world, add. And hopefully it's going to behave. Cool. Okay. So there's my very, very simple web part that I've actually got sitting in there. Okay. Now I mentioned before that you're actually constrained as to what you can actually do within the Sandbox solutions from a code perspective. So what I'm going to do now is actually create another web part, which is going to be a bad or an evil web part, and add that into this and show you what that actually means. So, okay, so let's go add a new web part. That, and I'm going to call it TechEd evil web part. Okay, and what I'm going to do under here, just zoom this up a little bit so you can see what I'm doing. I'm going to add a button and call it evil button. You can see how badly I can type. Evil button dot text. Evil stuff. Okay, and then it's going to add an event receiver onto this. Oops, click. Okay, and do that. Okay. Okay, so what I've basically done, I'm just doing a bit of a wire up. I'm going to put a button onto the page, display that out. When they click on it, I'm going to do something actually evil in here. Now, I mentioned before, in fact, I didn't actually mention it, you're actually constrained as to what you can actually do within these Sandbox solutions, okay? So one of the things you can't do is actually do the SP security run with elevated privileges, okay, which is quite one of the tricks you used to do under 2007, which is basically elevate your privileges up to run under the context of the application pool, which has typically meant that you had full write access against the whole site and the farm. So if I go SP security, you can actually see within the IntelliSense here that it's not actually appearing, okay? So it's a little bit of a gotcha. If I flick this back to a full trust solution, that would actually appear and then I can get the IntelliSense. However, if I do SP, oops, I'll just zoom this in a little bit more so you can see. Okay, SP security. Does help if you type it right. Notice that it's gone to green, and now I've got the IntelliSense. Okay, now this makes it a bit interesting. Okay, so I can actually get in here, run with elevated privileges. Okay, do the old delegate. Okay, and do something very evil here. Okay, so this is actually quite interesting, okay? Yeah, is that I'm in a Sandbox solution, okay? I shouldn't actually be able to run with elevated privileges, but the code senses, I've still got the actual bit of code that you can actually do that. If I go up and now build this, if I do a build, this is actually going to build okay. Okay, so this makes it a little bit more interesting. I'm going to now I'm just going to do a straight deploy. Sorry? Sorry, yeah, I do need the other button on there. Thanks for that. Have a t-shirt. 3 left. Okay. Okay, so this dot controls dot add, okay, and evil button. Okay, so I'm just going to do the Control Shift B to build that. I'm just going to deploy this out. Okay, so it's going to pull back the old one, deploy it out. Okay, save having to go through doing the old upload manually. Okay, so just wait for this to go in. Okay, so that's all good. So if I now jump back in to my page, I'm going to go back and edit and add in my evil web part. Okay. Insert web part, custom. Okay, save my page back. Okay, so what do you think is going to happen when I run this? Should fail. One hopes it does fail. Okay, so I'm just clicked on that. Okay, so what's actually happened in here, it's got an unhandled exception was thrown, okay, and the wrapper that's actually sitting in there. Now I've also been running ULS viewer in the background behind here as well. So basically this is actually quite a good little tool to actually monitor what's actually happening from your ULS, okay. You can download this from Copex, there's actually a couple of them. This one is the one that I actually prefer. So what I can basically do is that I can point it to the ULS logs and it basically monitors those for me. I can then put a filter onto it as well so I can actually monitor the particular stuff that I'm interested in here. And what I've done on this particular one is actually put a filter on the user process so I can actually see what's happening in there. So what's happened is that it's actually thrown an exception in here internally. Now if we have a look in the exception, it's actually quite interesting what it's actually done in here. Okay, so what it's done, it's thrown this exception, okay, sitting up the top there. And the main thing that it's stated up in here is this. Okay, could not load type, code to run elevated from the assembly Microsoft.SharePoint. Well, that kind of looks okay, okay? So what's going on here? Because you kind of think, well, that should actually be able to run. The interesting thing that it's actually doing in here is that, okay? Note the version number, 14.900.0.0. Okay, so what's actually happening behind the scenes here is we're actually, when we run our Sandbox solutions, it's actually being used code access security behind the scenes, and it's actually doing a binding redirect to point to this different assembly that we've actually got sitting in here. And that's what's come up and said we can't actually load the type. So where that is actually hiding, if we just jump into the 14 Hive, okay, jump in, have a look at our user code. We've got a web.config file sitting in here. So I'm just going to drag and drop that into bs.net. Okay. So what's actually happening in here is that we're actually running under this code access security policy has been applied, and it's doing a binding redirect into this 14.900.0.0. So that's the reason why that particular method wasn't available for me to actually use. Okay, so it's doing that. So what this basically means is that if you go and grab code off the internet, not that we do that at all, and you drop it in and put it into your Sandbox solutions, although they may compile okay, they may not actually execute okay. Okay? Okay, because they're going to get you on that. Now, a trick that you can do is that I can go into my references here. This is actually running the correct version, which is the 14.0.0.0 sitting down in there. I can very simply delete that out, add a new reference in, go for a browse. Okay, let's go to the C drive. Don't you love where they put this? Program files, common files, Microsoft shared, web server extensions, 14. Any idea what's called the 14? 14, okay. For 2003, SharePoint 2003, what was the name of that and why did they call it that? 60 Hive, yeah, and 6.0, yeah, okay. Very good. Okay, so basically what we had there you go, top. Two left, okay. Okay, so basically what we've got here is that we've got the 14 Hive for 2003. It was based on the 60 Hive, which was based on iOS 6.0. Under 2007, we called it the 12 Hive. Now, the reason behind that is that when we first released 2007, it was actually based on iOS 6.0 as well. So we couldn't actually have a duplicate, so we put it into the 12 Hive. We didn't like the number 13 for some mysterious reason. Okay, so we jumped from 12 to Office 14. Okay, so guess what the next version is going to be under? 15. Okay. The other thing that we should point out is that we're not meant to call it the Hive anymore. We're meant to call it the 14 root. Okay, go figure. Okay, but anyway, so I'm going to jump down into my user code, assemblies, and I'm going to grab that assembly. Okay, get rid of that. Now, if I go back and rebuild this, I should actually get a compilation error on that. Okay? So that's the way you can actually go through and do it. Now, the other thing you need to be wary about, though, is that don't actually compile and build your assemblies and deploy them with the 14.900 version. It will just break everything. Okay? This is only just a trick or a tip you can actually do to actually make sure that your code's going to compile and actually work okay. Okay, so I'll get rid of that. Get rid of that reference. Remove. Oops, wrong one. That's cool. And I'll add my reference back in. No, I'll browse back for it. Get the right one. SharePoint, and I deleted the security one as well. Okay, and that should go back to compiling, okay. Cool. Okay. Right, so that's our Hello World web part. Okay, so basically what we do here from a running of these particular Sandbox solutions, we've got the end user that basically goes off and it runs under the IIS process. Okay, so that's the WP W3 It then goes off, runs under the application pool identity. And what it then does is that it passes it off to the host service. Okay, so this is a service that's actually running on in your SharePoint farm, and it's a WP UC host service. And what it will then do is actually spawn off X number of worker processes to actually do the work for us. What it will then do is that it will go down, take the unmanaged code, get the subset of that, and then it will actually implement the full object model for us to actually use and run with under that. Okay. So the key thing about this is that what we're doing here is that your Sandbox solutions are actually running in a completely different and isolated process from the rest of the farm. So if I do something bad and evil in my user code service, it's actually not going to bring down the farm or impact the performance of the farm. It's only going to impact the worker process and the worker service that it's actually running under. So it's a good thing. So what we've got here is that we've actually got, by default, only one worker process. Now the recommendation here is that you should actually, or configure this to actually have, configure this up to be the number of cores plus one. So if you're running this on a quad machine, you should actually have 5, okay? Or if you've got a dual core, set it to 3, okay? Now you can do this through this thing called where you modify it by the number of tiers. So the way you do this is that you do the good old PowerShell script. So you go in there, you grab the good old assembly that we've got in there, the SP user code service. Now what you've got to do there is actually, first of all, you've got to go through and actually delete the original tiers that you've got sitting in there. And then you go through and you create your new tier. Now, although you can actually have multiple tiers, we actually only use one. I think what's going to happen going forward in the next versions of this is that they're going to have a different layer of tiers across here, a bit like how we've got the garbage collection going into multiple tiers. I think it's going to go to that type of approach. But at the moment, there's basically only one tier that we need to do. So what we should do, if you set up your new farm, look at how many processes you've got, let's look at how you're going to configure this, and basically set that to the number of cores plus one for your worker process.
Every server?
Not necessarily. Okay, so the question was, should you put this on every server? Where you should put this or do this is actually where you're going to be running the user process. Okay, so you've got the configuration options on that, which is a nice segue into the next slide. Thank you for that. Okay, which is what you can actually do on that. So you've actually got 2 different modes that you can run the user solutions in. You can either do it on the local mode, which basically means that it runs on your front-end web servers, or you can actually have a dedicated server or a server farm or set of servers running your user code processes. So when you go to configure this, you only actually have to do it once, okay, to run that command, because that actually applies to your farm configuration that you've actually got there. Now the trade-off between these is basically between performance and administration overhead. So obviously if you're going to put this in and put it on your front-end web service, you need to go in through your central admin, configure up your services on that, and actually get that working on that. Okay. Now the other thing that we can do is that we've got these Sandbox solutions that are all running, but we also want to make sure that people aren't abusing this as well. So this is where we get in and actually can do something called Sandbox solution monitoring. So we've got this concept, or we've got this addition into the quotas. So we've still got these site collection quotas. Now we've got some additional attributes on there, which basically will say how many points can we run for this particular site collection in a day, and also when will you actually get a warning when you're starting to get close to that particular threshold. Now it's a little bit complicated the way this actually works behind the scenes, but if you kind of break it down, it's fairly straightforward. What it basically does, it looks at all the different performance counters that are actually running for all the solutions across the site collections, for that site collection. It adds them all up, okay, and then it checks to see whether or not there's actually a max utilization usage against that, and that all kind of goes against a particular point. So basically what we've got from the monitored resources, this is a horrible slide to read, so I do apologise, but they're basically here for your reference. What we've basically got is that we have got these different metrics that we've got in here. So for example, we've got the CPU execution time, which is the second one down. What we're measuring under that is the number of seconds that's actually going in there. So every 3,600 seconds, CPU seconds, actually constitutes as being 1 point that actually goes against that. The other thing that we've got in there is that we've got a hard limit. So if we go past 60 of those, 60 points, that particular Sandbox solution is going to be axed. Okay, it's going to be stopped dead in the water. Now the idea behind this is that we don't want it to keep on going and going and consuming all the resources. So that's why we've got these two different measures in place. We've got the resource point, that adds up to what we've got over the whole site collections, and then we've got the hard limit before that particular Sandbox solution will be axed. So if we take an example of that, if we've got a web part that executes in a Sandbox solution and it's doing 40 SQL queries via the object model, 1 point is 20 SQL queries. Okay, so basically what that means is that we actually, every time we invoke this web part, we're actually going to use 2 points, okay, to run this over that particular day, okay, plus any other counters that it's actually using in there, okay. So once we've used up that point allocation for the day, okay, we can't run any Sandbox solutions in our Sandbox, okay, because you've overdone it. Okay, so let's have a look and see how that actually hangs together. So, okay, get rid of that. Okay, get rid of that. Okay. Now the first thing you're going to do is that you go to set up your Sandbox solutions is that you need to make sure that the service is actually running. So that's under your system settings, services on server, and then you've got the, I'll just make this a little bit easier to read. You've got this, you've got the Sandbox code solution service actually running. Now this is actually running as a service on the actual server. So if I jump into my server manager, that's my service actually running in here, okay? Now a little bit of a tip and a bit of advice for you. Okay. You may come in and find that your Sandbox solutions aren't actually running. You jump into here and you go, oh, my user host, code host service isn't actually running, so I'm going to start it through the services. Okay. It ain't going to work. Okay. You've actually got to kick it off through the central admin. Now the reason behind that is that when I start it through the central admin, it actually does a few more other things behind the scenes, which is basically to register, say, where are my Sandbox solutions actually running? Okay. And it then kicks off and starts this process going for us behind the scenes. If I was to kick this off without doing it through the central admin, it'll run for a few seconds, stop, okay, and then it wouldn't go again. If it does fail, you can do a restart, that's okay, but you initially got to do it through the central admin to get it going. The next thing I can do is I go in and have a look at my system settings, and I can then go in and have a look at manage my user solutions. So the first thing here is basically, tells me or gives me the opportunity to say whereabouts am I going to actually run my Sandbox solutions on the front-end web service, or am I actually going to put them out to a dedicated server. The other interesting thing too is that what I can do here is that I can actually block, as the IT pro, any solutions from actually coming up and being run on my farm. Okay? So you may have the situation where you know that somebody's written a lovely Sandbox solution, put it out in Codeplex. You know that it doesn't do some good stuff. It tends to destabilize the farm a bit because it's using a lot of resources. You don't want that to run in your particular environment. So what you can do is that you can actually block the Sandbox solution. So the way to do that, simply go in and do a browse, Techie demo. You grab the WSP in question, you upload it, you give it a nice little message like a bazinga, okay, and you block it. Okay. Now this is farm-wide, okay? So any Sandbox solution that's running won't be able to run on my particular farm now. Now it actually does a couple of cool little things in here. It keeps it keeps track of what the solution ID is, okay? And it also basically hashes it as well. So the idea being behind here is that if a user goes, oh damn, this has been blocked, and goes to rename it, okay, the hash code's still going to be the same because it's looking internally into it. Okay, so it's going to completely block it. So if I come in now, and if I simply just try and refresh my page, okay, I've got my bazinga, okay, my Sandbox solution has been blocked by the IT pro, okay, across the farm. Keeps it nice and easy for us. Okay, so I'm just going to remove that, pull it out, and go okay. Cool. Sorry, I couldn't quite hear. Oh, okay, sorry, where did I go to? Okay, so basically if I go to my system settings, okay, and then I've got my manage user solutions, okay, click into that, and that's where I can actually set the server affinity, is what I'm doing in there, and where I can actually block them. Welcome. Okay. Now the other thing that we've got is, I mentioned that we've got our monitoring that's actually happening in here. So if I go back to my solutions gallery, this is what this stuff up here is basically showing me as well. So as the end user, or as the user or the site administrator, I can actually see what my usage is of my actual Sandbox solutions that I'm doing. It also shows me my current resource usage of this. So currently I've used 0.08 of this as well. Now the way that this works is it's actually running some timer jobs behind the scenes for us. So if I go back into my, where is it, system settings, I think. No, sorry, monitoring. Wrong thing, click too far. If I go into my review my job definitions, the easiest way to find these, Control F to find, solution, okay, otherwise you'd be scrolling here trying to find them, okay. What I've actually got in here is that I've got 3 different jobs that actually run under here. Okay, come here. I've got these 3 that run in here. And these run at different time intervals. Okay, the first one is basically it does the resource usage update, which basically by default runs every 5 minutes. Okay, the next one does the usage log processing, which runs every 15 minutes. So this one, the usage log processing, basically sends out the email notification based on the threshold that I've got there that I'm actually getting close to actually using up all my my points on my Sandbox solution. And then you've got the daily resource usage update. So that's the one that actually goes through and then clears out your counters for you. Okay, so what you can potentially do if you want to is actually manually run that, and that should actually clear out your counters for your farm. Okay, for your farm. So that's all good. The other thing that I can do if I go back up if I have a look in my application settings, if I can configure my quotas and locks, down in here is what I actually get based on my actual utilisation, okay, for my points. So if I want to tweak these or change these, this is where I do it. Now note that this is on a site collection basis, okay? So it's based off a quota template. Quota templates are applied to your site collection. What this basically means is that if you want to change or how your allocations actually work against that, you may need to think about how you actually architect your farm, okay, because it is at a site collection basis. Cool. Okay, let's move on. Just notice the time. We're starting to run out a little bit of time on this. Okay, so the next thing we've got is that we've got this validation framework. Okay, so basically what this provides us the ability to do is actually validate a solution as part of the activation process. So the way that we do this is that when we go to activate our Sandbox solution, which runs in pulls it out of the content DB, we go to activate it. Our solution validation framework basically runs, checks against our bit of custom code that we've done, and says yay or nay as to whether or not we can actually do this. Now, in order to get this actually to work, we've got to write this code or this validator. So it is a development job that we need to do and deployed as a full trust solution at the farm level. And we then need to register against the user process, the user code service in order to get this to work. So let's have a quick look at that. And to save time, I've already gone through and written one. So the key things about this is that I've got my validation code that's already in here. The key thing that I do here is that I simply just inherit from the SP solution validator. Okay? Once I've done that, I've got to put implementation against two different methods, which is basically the validate assembly and then the validate solution. What I can then do is that I can send back a properties value equals true or false, depending on what I want to do there. Okay, so what I'm doing on this one is actually very simple. I'm actually invalidating all solutions that are going to be running on my farm, okay, no matter what. So I'm basically disabling it. The other way I could have done this is actually set the point allocation or the point quotas down to 0. Would have had the same effect on here. Okay, so the idea being behind here is you can actually go in and actually examine that particular Sandbox solution to check that it's actually doing something that you want it to do. An example of this is that you could say, I'm only going to put Sandbox solutions in that our department have written, okay, and hence they need to have the strong name key, okay, and so hence they need to have this particular key or certificate in that particular Sandbox solution, okay, as an example. So the other thing that I need to do in here is that if I do set it to false, I need to give it what the validation error message is. So my one's pretty simple. It's just going to say no user solutions are allowed, compliments of your IT Pro, nice little smiley. And then I've got to redirect them to this error URL page, which gets redirected out, and that's simply going to set out in here. Okay, and it's basically just shows a nice little error message in there for us. And all I'm doing under here is doing a no message. Okay. Now, the other thing that I need to do is that I've done this. I've written the validation. I've now got to register it with the actual the user code service. So the easiest way to do this is to put an event receiver on my feature, which has been scoped at the SP farm level. So a quick look at that. We've got the SP farm sitting up in here because it applies across your farm. I then put it against my event receiver code, and what I'm simply doing in here is I'm simply adding into the solution validators class what match my solution validators in and adding this particular method in. When I go to deactivate, because if you do anything programmatically, you should also do it programmatically on the deactivation of it, I'm simply removing my solution validator out based on the GUID, okay, which is here, which is the same GUID as my actual feature that I've got. Okay, so really very straightforward to do. So just to save on time, what I'm going to do is just to make this easy, I'm just going to build this. I'm going to deploy it. Now, I mentioned that when you do a Sandbox solution, anything scoped at the SP site is automatically activated. Okay, anything at the SP farm level, okay, is also automatically activated as well. So I've put my feature out there that should automatically be activated out there. What should happen is That's been put out there. If I go to my central admin, if I go to system settings, where is it? No, I don't want to go there. Manage farm features. Okay. Now, there's my solution validator already put in there, and it has been activated as well. Okay, so it's sitting in there and all working good. If I go into my solution gallery, I will, oops, don't do that. I'm just going to deactivate it. That should pull the functionality out. If I then go to activate, in here, there's my nice little error message that I've got sitting there. Okay, so I've blocked all Sandbox solutions from running in my farm. Okay, nice and easy.
Just a question in there.
Yeah.
At the beginning, you mentioned like for the Sandbox solution, you can't use your web part, which is I think the
Correct. Correct.
But in here, I've seen like you have actually used one ACX page and copying with the
Yeah, but the validator is not deployed as. Sorry, the question is I said before that for Sandbox solutions you can't use the layouts directory. Okay. For the validators, they have to be deployed as a full trust solution. So therefore, you can use the layouts. Okay? Validators have to be deployed as a full trust. Okay? Makes sense because they're going into the farm, which is above SP side.
So does it mean that if you create a web part and if you provide like the full trust as a full trust web part, can it still deploy it?
If I create a Sandbox solution, convert it across to being a full trust, then yes, that would still work, but it would no longer be a Sandbox solution. Okay, it's in a full trust assembly. Okay, so that's pretty cool. So that's how you get those. I'll deactivate that later so we can actually get going. So that's our Sandbox validators. Okay, now.
Just one question. If when you do the validators and say you've got some Sandbox solutions running, so you have to deactivate and activate them again?
It's only on the, I believe it's only on the activation.
So if something is already running and then you do the validator, you don't pick it up?
Okay, so the question is when do the validators actually kick in? I'm pretty sure it only happens on the activation. Okay, so if you add a new validator in, the existing ones I think will still work. I'll try that out later. Okay, it's a good question. Okay. Okay, one left. Okay, one left. Okay, so now we've got the opportunity about how do we actually break out of the sandbox, okay, because we are constrained as to what we can actually do there. We've basically got 4 different options we can do there. We can do the full trust proxy, the external list approach, which I'll take you through, and custom workflow activities, and then the Silverlight UI, and I'll take you through these in a bit more detail. So what we can do here is if we go for a full trust proxy, what we can basically do is that we can put or do our sandbox solution. We can then, as a full trust solution, actually deploy something out there, which actually does a bit more implementation. What we basically do there is say that this is a proxy operation that our sandbox solution can actually call, okay, and invoke, and we can also pass arguments backwards and forwards between the two of them. So this is a mechanism that we can actually get out, okay? So as an example, Sandbox solutions can't write to the event log, okay? And they can't write to the log files. So this is actually, if you want to be able to do this, then this is actually a good and recommended way of actually doing it. Actually have a proxy sitting up there that you can actually do these operations against those secure resources for you. Now I'm going to take you through a code example of actually how you do this. Okay, so it's pretty straightforward. The other approach that we can do is that we can have our worker processor running, our sandbox solution running there, and we can then use the external lists. Okay, so if we want to get to data, we simply use the external list using the BCS runtime, and then we can actually access out and get to our data that way. We can only do this, though, using external lists. We can't do it going directly against the BDC, okay, sorry, or the BCS, I should call it, okay, because that's actually breaking out of our site collection boundary. So this is a mechanism that we can actually use. Now, one thing to be wary about this particular approach depends on how your BCS has actually been defined, okay, because you've got different configuration options you can actually do on this. You know, user identity. and then you can either use the secure store service or you can do a revert to self. Okay, think about how this is actually going to be delegated and put through. Okay, particularly if you're doing the user identity. Okay, you'd have to probably set up. In fact, you would need to set up Kerberos and then do the delegation through. Okay, bearing in mind that one of your steps on your delegation through is actually the Sandbox solution worker process. Okay, so you need to take that into account. The other way to do this is I could actually set up a workflow. So although I can run workflows, I can only run these as declarative workflows, okay, in a Sandbox solution. So if you've got any code or anything behind that, that's not going to work because the workflows assemblies actually need to run as full trust. So this is actually another mechanism breaking it out. I could actually create a full trust assembly, give the declarative of that, and then use my Sandbox solution to declaratively use that particular action or activity that I've got sitting in there. Okay, another approach. One issue to be wary of though, okay, with the workflows, they can actually run under 3 different contexts, okay, depending on when that workflow is actually executed, when it's been rehydrated out, and actually what the execution of that is based on the time of jobs that are actually running. Okay, being for example, if the workflow service isn't available, it's going to get queued and then it'll run under the OWS timer job. Now these have all got different accounts, so once again, if you're doing anything in there, such as connecting through to something else and you're worried about the identity, you need to think about what that identity is and configure up, possibly using Kerberos again with the delegations, based on those 3 different accounts that you're going to be running under. Now the last one is a little bit more of an interesting one. It's a valid approach for doing this, and this is actually using the Silverlight client object model. So basically what you can do here is that I could actually have my Silverlight application running in a Sandbox solution, and then I can call out to my Silverlight application, which is actually running in the browser. Now that's sitting out there, okay, and that can then depend on what the client is authorized to see and access those different resources for you, okay. Basically what we're doing here is actually moving the problem to the Silverlight application. But once again, this is a valid mechanism of actually breaking out of the Sandbox solutions if you need to get to resources outside of that. So with that, let's have a look at how we can actually break out of the Sandbox. Okay, so what I've done again is already pre-configured this, save time to type a bit of code, but I'll take you through what we need to do. What I've basically got here is that I've got 2 different classes, 2 different projects. I've got my proxy, and then I've got my web part, which is my Sandbox solution, which I want to break out of. The first thing that I do is configure up my proxy. What I do under that is I've got my arguments that my arguments I'm going to do in there. The first thing I've got to do there is basically inherit from XP proxy operation. I've then got this class called fileargs, which is basically my own arguments that I want to use. Okay, and what this bit of code is going to do is write to the file system for me, okay, which I can't do from a Sandbox solution. The other thing that I need to do is that I need to mark up and give the SharePoint permission attribute on here and say that it's got security action link demand on it, okay, on my proxy class. The other thing that I need to do too in my assembly, which relates back to how Sandbox solutions work, is that I need to also put in this allow partially trusted callers. Now the reason behind this is that if I've got my Sandbox solution, the only things that it can call are the allow partially trusted callers, assemblies that have been marked up that way. If you don't do that, it's not going to actually work. It's going to fail. So you do need to add that in. Okay. If I have a quick look at fileargs, basically it's inheriting simply from the operation arguments, and all I'm doing here is basically having a string, doing a getter and setter on that, and basically returning the contents of it. Okay. Very, very straightforward, very, very simple. Okay. On that. Now, if I have a look at my web part, okay, what I've got to do in here, I'm basically doing the same type of thing, is that I'm creating a new button, adding it on. I've also got a label in here. I then have to then specify, which is what I'm doing under here, basically what the proxy assembly name is and what the proxy type name is that I want to actually invoke. Now the reason behind that is that when I go to do it, I use the SP utility execute register proxy. Okay, this thing in here, and operate that method, and I pass in the assembly name, the proxy method, as well as what I'm trying to actually get to, my proxy code, and then my file arguments that it's going to actually bring back. Okay, so it's a bit of a manual wire up that you need to do. So I do need to know within my Sandbox solution the actually fully the strong type name of what I need to actually invoke in here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to build this. I'm then going to deploy this out. So this is actually running at a SP farm level. In fact, there's no feature associated with this. I'm just simply going to do a deploy of that. Okay, that's going. Okay, that's been added out. I'll add out my web part here, my breakout web part. I'm just going to do a straight deploy of that. Need to go back into, I need to unblock. Should be able to deactivate that. Okay, so I'm just removing my solution validator, otherwise I won't get anything in there. Okay, make sure that's actually come through. Cool, that's in. Okay, the other thing I was want to check, go back onto the temp. It's running to C temp, there's nothing in there at the moment. If I then, okay, insert web part, where is it? Bugger. Did that go through? Hang on, have I done something silly? Fails on the last demo, how about that? Error. Solution failed validation. I didn't get it out quick enough. Okay. Cool. Okay. No, too soon. Okay, solutions, make sure it's there. TK demo, that's fine. 2 more seconds. If it's not there, you just have to trust me that it works. It should be. It should be by default. Or did I not activate it? That's the other thing to check. There it is, breakout web part. It's just a timing issue. Okay, save the page. Okay, and hello TechEd. Okay, and do a create. Okay. So what I forgot to do here is that I haven't registered it. So what I need to do here, a little tip you can do, just go into PowerShell. I just need to run the add-in, so I get the commandlets happening in there. And I need to register Sandbox proxy. Okay, and run this, which was basically the same thing. So it's going to register that now and there. If I go back, click on home. Hello TechEd. Okay, let's put it there, go to the file system, there's my document. Okay, and done it that way, okay? Now I did that via PowerShell. What would have actually been a better way for the last t-shirt of actually getting that in without having to do it through PowerShell? C#? I could do it through code, but where? Feature activation. Yeah, I should have done as part of the feature activation on there. Have you got a t-shirt? You got a t-shirt? There you go. Okay, so I should have actually done that as part of the feature activation. Okay, so think about how you're actually going to do this. Also, when it goes to deactivate it, retract it out again as well on that. Cool. So, with that, okay, so hopefully I've given you an overview about what you can actually do in Sandbox solutions. Okay, how you can actually go through and manage it and monitor your Sandbox solutions. How you can actually go through and validate your Sandbox solutions. And if you need to, how to actually break out of the Sandbox solution so you can actually get out and do stuff in full trust. I've got my email address up there. Okay, so it's wayne.ewington@microsoft.com. If you've got any questions about this or anything to do with SharePoint, please do not hesitate to ping me an email. Okay, I'll do my best to get you an answer. Okay, doesn't have to be relating to Sandbox solutions. It could be anything to do with SharePoint. Okay, and I think we're done right on time. Enjoy the rest of TechEd.